My name is Eyad Kishawi. I'm an organizer with Al-Awda, the Palestinian Right of Return Coalition. I'm a refugee from Jaffa and Gaza, born and raised in Lebanon. We are very honored to have three powerful speakers on our program today. Samir Salem from the North American Nakba tour, Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, our public intellectual who almost does not require an introduction, and Ziad Abbas, a visionary leader in our community. I will introduce each individually. Before we begin the program, we will display some media and then resume.
الحق سلاحي وأقاوم، أنا فوق جراحي سأقاوم، أنا لن أستسلم لن أرضى، وعليك بلادي لأساوم. الحق سلاحي وأقاوم، أنا فوق جراحي سأقاوم، أنا لن أستسلم لن أرضى، وعليك بلادي لأساوم. بيتي هنا أرضي هنا، بحر السهل النهر لنا، وكيف بوجه النار أسالم سأقاوم. الحق سلاحي وأقاوم، أنا فوق جراحي سأقاوم، أنا لن أستسلم لن أرضى، وعليك بلادي لأساوم. عدوك يا وطن اندحر، عليك الكون ما قدر، قاوم شعب جنون الريح، تحدى الخوف والخطر. عدوك يا وطن اندحر، عليك الكون ما قدر، قاوم شعب جنون الريح، تحدى الخوف والخطر. يرحلون ونبقى، والأرض لنا ستبقى، ها نحن اليوم أقوى في كل الملاحم. يرحلون ونبقى، والأرض لنا ستبقى، ها نحن اليوم أقوى في كل الملاحم. بيتي هنا أرضي هنا، بحر السهل النهر لنا، وكيف بوجه النار أسالم سأقاوم. الحق سلاحي وأقاوم، أنا فوق جراحي سأقاوم، أنا لن أستسلم لن أرضى، وعليك بلادي لأساوم. بيتي هنا أرضي هنا، بحر السهل النهر لنا، وكيف بوجه النار أسالم سأقاوم سأقاوم.
Welcome again, everybody. As mentioned earlier, we are very honored to have three powerful speakers today. Samir Salem from the North American Nakba tour, Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, our public intellectual who almost does not require an introduction, and Ziad Abbas, a visionary leader in our community. I will introduce each individually. Al-Awda aims to realize our return to Palestine. Our objectives are to raise awareness in our communities concerning the human and legal rights of Palestinian refugees, to foster relationships with the media to help the effort of educating our community of the human and legal rights of the Palestinian refugees, to educate elected representatives on the grave implications resulting from the continuing violations of numerous human and legal rights of Palestinians and how we can affect change, to develop and coordinate grassroots and student initiatives for actions related to Palestinian refugee rights, to develop and strengthen links and coordinate efforts with human and civil rights organizations in support of the Palestinian struggle for return, freedom, and equality, to empower refugees with projects that nurture their autonomy and determination, to exercise their legal rights, first and foremost, their natural right to return to their towns and villages, as supported by international law and United Nations resolutions, to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinian refugees. All over the US, Al-Awda worked with its partners to mobilize for protests and support for Palestine. With the help of the Palestinian Action Network here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we mobilized over 9,000 people. LA, with its partners, mobilized over 20,000. Chicago mobilized 9,000. New York had an enormous turnout, where the estimated count was between 70 and 80,000 people, some reporting as much as 100,000 people. Charlotte, North Carolina had 1,600 over two protests. Black Lives Matter in Salem organized a march on their own in support of Palestine. Florida and New Jersey are organizing theirs today. Following the model of suffocating the apartheid regime in South Africa, we launched a disruption campaign of trading Israeli goods with a historic blockade of the Zim liner in 2008 and then again in 2014. When we blocked with the International Longshore Workers Union, where they refused to unload and reload an Israeli ship in the port of Oakland. The ship had not returned for 7 years, but it is now returning next week. We plan to be there to block that ship again, along with our partners in Local 10, and send it off. In 2014, they attempted to stop at multiple ports and they were blocked from all across the West Coast, from Seattle to LA. We intend to do the same. For the first time in 55 years, the Palestinians in 48, 67, Gaza, Jerusalem, and refugee camps struggled together in unity and calling for the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. The balance of powers has shifted. The US is losing its grip over the control of our lives, futures, and peoples. Our people now fight back. Today, I would like to talk about the US and not Israel. It is the US who funds our colonial subjugator with $500,000 an hour or $3.8 billion a year. It is the US who defines peace as the absence of resistance, while US police kill 3 people per day or 1,100 per year. Most are unarmed, Black and Indigenous people. It is the US that defines peace as Abraham Accords. While Jerusalem now hosts the US Embassy, its people are murdered in cold-blooded checkpoints, isolated, with its religious places desecrated by the US-funded Israeli military. Peace, according to American definition, is the construction of Jewish-only colonies on Palestinian land, the theft of Palestinian homes by hordes of colonists from Brooklyn, with the protection of US-funded Israeli military. If we die quietly, like Black, Indigenous, and brown people die here, this is peace. If we fight back or protest, then there is conflict, and that is concerning. Both sides at that point need to exercise restraint. The thief and the dispossessed, the murderer and the dead, the one exercising ethnic cleansing and genocide, and the one being cleansed. These are both sides to which the US refers. This is not surprising, as Israel, first and foremost, is a US colony. Joe Biden himself stated that he is a Zionist, and if it wasn't for the state of Israel, he would seek to establish one. He stated that you should imagine how many troops and aircraft carriers our region would demand for the US to exercise its control over our lives if it wasn't for Israel. Let's state it as it is. Israel is therefore an American project. 8 million of our people are refugees because of the US. 7 million of our people live in a state of apartheid under the boots of settler colonialism because of the US. The US wants and needs the status quo. Our people are dying. Israel exercising racism and genocide without any opposition. They told us that the old will die and the young will forget. If we look around us throughout all these mobilizations, the vast majority of people were youth. For 73 years, they sliced and diced our land and people. These are refugees and the Arabs should take them. These are not Israeli citizens and they should just shut up and be quiet. These are citizens, but they are not Jewish nationals. Come and visit our diverse, multi-ethnic state and enjoy watching them ride on camels and bringing out your beach umbrella and drink in Jaffa, in Haifa, in Al Sudud, in Asqalan. It all backfired. You want to pass racist laws stating that Palestine is for Jews only. The people of Jaffa, Haifa, Nazareth, Lid, and Ramle rose up. You want your hordes to barge into our homes in Ramadan and Easter and kick our people out of Jerusalem. The people of Jerusalem rose up. Gaza unified the Palestinian voice, in spite the complete co-optation of the neo-colonial leadership called the Palestinian Authority. In struggle, we stand. In struggle, we unite. And in struggle, we shall return. So how can we get peace in our part of the world? We need to end US imperialism and remove its aircraft carrier from our land. The Zionist project is an American one that has acquired all characteristics of Nazism, including pogroms of colonists who were defeated in Jerusalem, rampaging through Palestinian towns occupied in 1948. While the colonists were shooting into Palestinian homes, with the protection of the Israeli army, the youth of Lid went to the streets to protect their families and repel these hordes. The mayor of the city labeled our youth as the ones engaging in the pogrom and compared the events to Kristallnacht of 1938. Nothing is more Nazi-esque than watching the deputy mayor of Jerusalem tell a young Palestinian that after you recover from the bullet in your ass, next one will go into your head. The US project can accurately be called now the Zion-Nazi project. Like Nazism and colonialism before it, it too will fall. Peace is predicated on our ability to return home, to live free on our land, and for the US to pay us back for the loss of wealth that we would have generated had the empire not caused the loss of our land for the last 73 years. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Samir Salem is a filmmaker whose work centers on love, resistance, and collective liberation. He is currently working to overcome media censorship and bias to produce the feature film Fidayeen about Layla Khalid and Patricio Arguello Ryan. Samir is the national organizer of the North American Nakba Tour. He's on the board of directors of Growing Palestine. He creates content and analysis for If American You, and he is a leader in the JVP Los Angeles chapter. When he's not working, he mentors young storytellers to write and control their narratives. Please welcome Samir Salem, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Eyad. Thank you to everyone at Al-Awda for inviting the North American Nakba Tour to speak here today. As most of you know, it has been 73 years since the Nakba. In 1948, Jewish paramilitary gangs expelled over 750,000 Palestinians from their ancestral homes and villages, creating one of the largest refugee crises of our time. About 100,000 of those refugees, mostly from the northern villages, fled to Lebanon. Others found refuge in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and there are even refugee camps in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. In 1967, the Israelis, with the help of the United States' military might, created yet another round of Palestinian refugees. Many of them also ended up in Lebanon. Today, by UNRWA's records, there are over 500,000 Palestinian refugees just in Lebanon alone. Lebanon is home to 12 Palestinian refugee camps. Today, you will hear a Palestinian perspective that is rarely heard from. They are third and fourth generation Palestinian refugees. They and their families are stateless because the Israeli entity and the United States refused them their right of return to their homes and villages in Palestine. Just a brief history about the North American Nakba Tour. The tour came to be when one of my colleagues who was involved with an SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, in New York, had a difference of opinion with some other members about whether the right of return should be included in an event they were putting together. I won't get into the details, but the point is that there was an element within the pro-Palestine movement that regarded the right of return as taboo or somehow undesirable to talk about. So a few of us came together and decided that not only should the right of return be highlighted in every pro-Palestine space, but we would champion the people affected most by this censorship to speak about it for themselves. Between 2016 to 2019, we drove 3 Palestinian refugees from town to town around the US and up into Canada, and they were able to tell their stories to 100 communities who had never heard about the Nakba nor the need for the Palestinian refugees' right for return. These tours centered on stories from 2 amazing, brave, and strong Nakba survivors, Akram and Musa. And the brilliant, gifted translator and presenter was Amina El-Ashkar, who is now pursuing her doctorate degree in London. Today, the Nakba Tour features 4 equally brilliant and outstanding young women, who I have the honor to introduce to you right now. Haneen Youssef has a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics from the American University of Beirut and a degree in chemistry from the Lebanese University. She has worked as a dietitian, a food quality control inspector, a field investigator, and an English teacher at UNRWA. Haneen's family is from El Amanaya village near Safad. In 1948, they ended up in the Wavel refugee camp. Hiba El-Ashkar is pursuing her master's degree in instructional designing at the Lebanese University and has been an English teacher, a translator, and a curriculum developer. She volunteers with the Palestinian Red Cross. Hiba's family is from Haifa and Nablus. She lives in Burj al-Barajni refugee camp. Unfortunately, there is a power outage in Burj al-Barajni camp, so Hiba is going to join us on her 3G network and by audio alone. Samir Muhammad majors in nursing at the AUB. She is a Palestinian diploma student at the Academy of Refugee Studies. She is a research assistant and has volunteered at AUB MC Hospital during the Beirut blast and the COVID-19 pandemic. Samir's family is from the village of Lubia near Tiberias. Her parents ended up in Burj al-Shamali and El Jalil refugee camps. Ruba Abdel Jawad graduated from Beirut Arab University in civil and environmental engineering. She has been an engineer, designer, and estimator in Beirut and Kazakhstan. And she's also a private tutor in math, physics, biology, and chemistry. She is pursuing her next degree in social studies at the Lebanese University. Ruba's family is from Lida in Gaza. In 1967, they ended up in Ain al-Halwa refugee camp. So let's begin. We'll have a discussion about what it's like to be a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon. Haneen?
Hi.
To start off, can you please give us some context to what happened in 1948?
Yes, sure. Let's go back to the 1930s. The Jewish found out that they are no longer safe in Europe, so they wanted to find a place for them, a new homeland. So Palestine was their destination. And Britain here helped them by giving them the chance to move to Palestine by opening the doors for immigration. So here Jewish or the Zionist movement started to move by groups into Palestine and to occupy lands and homes, asking people to leave their homes and occupy them. Here, Britain said that it is no longer responsible for this, and it took off its hands. But Jewish wanted to occupy more and more, and they started to spread over all the Palestinian lands. They continued in that until the day of Nakba, the day of May 15, 1948, where Israeli declared that they have their own nation, the Israeli nation. So that day, known as Nakba Day, 15 May of every year.
Thank you. Thanks for that context. Going a little further, can you tell us about how your family experienced what happened in May of 48?
Yes, sure. Well, my grandfather's story, or my grandfather case, was just like many Palestinian cases. Let us imagine together that we have a house that we build rock by rock, and we have a memory in each side of it. And suddenly a stranger come and ask you to leave your home, to leave the place that you have lived your entire life, for no reason, for no excuses, just because he wanted this. Well, this is exactly what happened with my grandparents' family. They used to have their own home, living in peace, nothing annoying them, and suddenly strangers known to be as Jewish or Zionist came into their home, 5 to 6 soldiers, I think. They came into my grandfather's home, asking them to leave. They let all the family to be in one room. They asked the men to take off their clothes, and asked the women to be in another room, and they started to criticize them, asking them to take off clothes, to say bad words and such. Here, my grandfather's dad asked his family to obey to their rules in accordance to not to have the consequences and the circumstances of the Israeli soldiers. So they left their home that time. They thought that it was about 2 to 3 days and everything will come back to normal. But what happened that things were getting worse until May 15, 1948, after the Israeli declaration and after the Nakba Day. There, my grandfather, parents and dad decided to leave Palestine to a nearby country to find shelter and home. They decided to move to Lebanon. Many refugees or many Palestinians left Palestine not for their own sake, but just to avoid the consequences and circumstances. They left to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, or even to West Bank and Gaza. My grandparents moved to Lebanon. They had to take their journey on feet. So that was a real struggle. They had no food, no water, and even no shelter to sleep. They used to sleep on roadsides and borders. It was such a great misery that no one expected. By the word Nakba itself, that means catastrophe. It was really that. It is our an obstacle and our demand that always we ask to take off and to be away of it. So yes, refugees were from all over the Palestinian cities and to all over the countries in the world.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happened to so many families, and it's still going on today, which is actually what I want to talk about now. I mean, what happened to your family back then sounds eerily familiar to what's happening today in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem.
Exactly.
So I thought maybe we could talk about, would anyone like to share their thoughts about the connections?
Well, I may start with this. Well, when my grandfather used to tell us about the Nakba Day, I couldn't imagine the struggle and couldn't imagine the fear that they lived. But now when I saw the Sheikh Jarrah event and how people are struggling, I really can feel the struggle they have, the amount of fear, the amount of struggle they do every day. So yes, it's really the same case back into the 1948, and people are still surviving, and people are still asking for their rights to stay in their homeland, Palestine, and to be in Jerusalem.
If may I speak as well about Sheikh Jarrah?
Please, Hiba.
It's first of all, I was even though I knew about Sheikh Jarrah, I never knew the back story of Sheikh Jarrah. And it really astonished me how the fact that even Palestinian people in their own countries are even refugees. You know, like you're a refugee in your own country. That was kind of shocking. At the same time, the way Hanin expressed, we kind of took what happened in 1948. We experienced it, even though we did not physically experiencing it, but seeing videos, listening to the way people are talking about it, demanding their rights, it affected us as well. And I don't know if you noticed that, but there's a huge spread about the story, which media played a big role about it. If you noticed about this.
Well, I mean, since you mentioned that, regarding Sheikh Jarrah, like the media here in the US has virtually ignored all context surrounding the ethnic cleansing and instead is focused on the tried and true forms of distraction, rockets from Hamas, Israel has a right to defend itself, and they use misleading terms such as clashes, evictions, and the both sides narratives. So maybe you have some impressions that you guys want to talk about that in how it pertains to the ongoing Nakba.
Personally, I believe it like um, it's for nothing, because even though the media, you know, the newspapers and magazines, if you want to say, or electronic newspaper, are talking about this, aren't talking about this truthfully. A huge amount of platforms on social media like Instagram, like Facebook, like even TikTok, if you know about it, they are playing a huge role in spreading awareness. And what's more important, it's reaching people with a huge amount of influence and celebrities that are spreading this awareness, which is amazing. And I've noticed a lot of people are starting to deny what they were taught about Zionism and what they were taught about Palestine, and they're starting to learn about the truth. So I believe the media, the American media, can try as much as they can to hide the truth. They cannot hide it from people. People are being more aware of what's happening.
Absolutely, absolutely, it's great. Anybody else have anything to say about that, or should I move on to the next? Ruba, you have something to say?
I want to share my thoughts too.
Please, please do.
Yeah, I want to share my thoughts regarding the media. Well, people who know only few about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict would definitely believe what the US media is delivering to her audience. Well, as if largely that has already inverted the fact about the violence regarding Israel. Pictures and videos showing Israel's attack on Palestinians are being omitted from social media, and whoever is using for several times hashtags like Gaza is under attack is being blocked from commenting. So yes, media plays an important role in delivering the information.
Yeah, Ruba, we got most of what you said, but I think you're breaking in and out. Maybe if we cut your video, maybe the audio would be better. Do you think? In the meantime, I'm going to move on. I know we have a limited amount of time. So Hiba, I want to bring it back to Lebanon in 1948. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon after they arrived?
After the arrival of Palestinian refugees to Lebanon, let me note that they stayed on the border for like 6 months. They were not welcomed neither in Lebanon or in Syria, so they stayed on the border. And after the trial of entering Palestine, they were shot by the occupation. Um, that's first, and then a lot of massacres happened against the Palestinian refugees. There's this one where they were trying to chase the PLO organization, you know, the Palestinian Liberation Organization combat forces. They were trying to chase them, and they ended up destructing Ain al-Hilwi camp. And if I may note that after that, after the destruction of Ain al-Hilwi, women, Ain al-Hilwi women, rebuild this camp so it would be a decent place for them to live without men. I mean, it was something amazing to do, you know, especially there were no men to protect them. Moving on to the massacres that happened, let me talk about Sabra and Shatila. We all heard about it. You know what happened is that the PLO combat units had an agreement with the U.S. government. The agreement statement stated that in return of you leaving Beirut, of the PLO backing out of Beirut, they will reassure or guarantee the safety of Palestinian refugees, which by the time after the PLO combat unit left Beirut, it was broken. The US government did not stay to its word. And more to that, they even weaponized the right wing militia, the Lebanese right wing militia, which did the Sabra and Shatila massacre under the eyes of Israeli forces and the US government knowing what was happening in Sabra and Shatila, and they did not stop it, or they did not do anything to stop it. For 3 consecutive days, a lot of atrocities were happening. There was rape, there was kidnapping, a lot of horrible things were happening in Sabra and Shatila camp. All of that, if you, I'm gonna note something that even at night, the Israeli forces were bombing light bombs so that the right-wing militias would see what is happening, so they would continue doing what they were assigned to do. So that was like the biggest massacre against there was a lot of massacres, but this one, the most horrible one that happened on the Lebanese lands against the Palestinian refugees. I'm gonna
Yeah.
note that even though we were out of our country, we are not, we did not escape from the plan of, you know, demolishing us or making us not exist or make us vanish. We did not escape from that. There are always trials of, you know, not making us exist to break us down.
Yeah, there's a clear effort to eliminate Palestinians from Palestine and Palestinian refugees from the face of the earth. You know, there's also a clear effort to divide Palestinians. And so, you know, the recent popular resistance movement and the demonstrations that we've been seeing in Jerusalem, Haifa, Lydda, Gaza, Jordan, and other places looks to me like undeterred unity. So I want to ask you all, how have the Palestinians in Lebanon expressed their unity with the rest of our people over the past few years and even today? And if you can relate it to some of your own personal experiences, that would be great.
If I may be speaking about it, I think the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, if you want to talk about the ones in Lebanon, even outside, they have huge awareness. We're gonna go back to the social media. They have a better awareness about what's happening. They removed, you know, the political party speech from their vocabulary, and they started talking about unity. They, for example, if someone is from Fatah, he does not speak in the name of Fatah. No, he speaks in the name of Palestine. If someone is from Hamas, he speaks in the name of Palestine. All of what's happening brought unity to the vocabulary of these influencers, Palestinian influencers. And as well, you know, we go to protests. For example, there's always protests in Beirut to support what's not to support what's happening. I mean, like to stand against what's happening in Palestine, and so on.
Hiba, since I have you, can you talk to me a little bit about your experience when, I think it was in 2010 or 11, about what we thought was going to be a march of return from Lebanon? It seems like a lot, there's some similarities right now to that moment.
I think there's a lot of similarities. No, I have to be opposite of that. Why? Because what's happening, what happened in 2011 was a big march, the Right to Return march from Jordan, from Lebanon, from Syria. It was from outside of Palestine, you know. But right now, what's happening is, sorry, I'm gonna go back to 2011. We went to we went to the south. We went to the borders, Palestinian borders. There was a point that buses were not allowed to continue to the Naura or Ras Maroon and Ras, sorry. They were not allowed to go there. So we stepped out of the bus and we went walking. We went to the borders. I remember seeing women, old women, holding their bags, holding their stuff because they believe that that day is the day that they are going to return to their home. They're going to return to their lands. And I remember guys and youth where they were ready to give out their lives just because of this cause. They wanted to return so badly. That was the day to return. That was it. But unfortunately, what happened was, in Lebanon, you cannot have the freedom to do that. So they had to protect their land as well. The Lebanese forces had to protect their land as well. But youth went to the border, to the fence between the borders, and they tried to cut it. But in return, 18 men, young men, were killed and murdered by the Israeli forces and snipers, and 28 were injured. What's happening right now is that everything's happening inside of Palestine, which is giving us a lot of push to do something. We want to do something. We want to go to the border. I don't know if you saw the video yesterday. Men went to the border and they climbed the wall. They were up and they were shot even by the Israeli forces. And that, but we cannot do anything again because it's not our country. We don't have the freedom to do everything we want, And
Yeah.
I think
Well,
what's happening inside is giving us a lot of push, a lot of energy, a lot of we want to do something spirit, but we just have limited things to do.
yeah. Thank you. I want to bring Summer into the conversation. Summer, I know you have some experience with with some of the uprising, and I think it was 2008 or 2019. If you want to talk about that, feel free. Otherwise, I have another question for you following it.
Hi Samir, hi everyone. I'm sorry I have to keep my camera off because my internet is bad. Samir, let me tell you first that the Lebanese government consider us as foreigners instead of refugees, so we are deprived of our political and civil rights. And work permits in Lebanon is not perceived as necessary, but unfortunately in 2019, the new Lebanese Minister of Work has suddenly decided to force the Palestinian refugees to issue work permits, which decrease our opportunities to find a job and increase the financial burden on us. So as a human reaction, this triggers us, and we want outside to the streets, inside the camps, the Palestinian camps, to do uprising against this new unfair regulation. Some Lebanese people have supported us in this movement and in the small protest in some of Beirut's area. The protest or the uprising was peaceful, and it proves that we, Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, are not violent, which, as the media always represents us.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the situation, can you talk a little bit about the social and economic and political situation facing Palestinian refugees in Lebanon today? From my understanding, Palestinian refugees don't have the right to work in over 70 occupations. They can't be doctors, lawyers, engineers, etc. Maybe you can talk about this and in relation to your family and how it affects you personally.
Okay, let me first tell you that the average monthly income of the Palestinian workers in Lebanon is below the minimum wage and represent only 80% of the average monthly income of the Lebanese, and half of the workers receive less than $300 per month. Imagine that a whole family is living for the entire month for only $300. Now, to tell you a little bit about my story, my parents are doctors. My father has studied medicine in Germany, but unfortunately, he had the idea that Palestinians refugees should stay in Lebanon until we return back to Palestine. So he returned back to Lebanon in 1980. He is not allowed to work in any governmental or private hospital. He is not allowed to open his own clinic. So he ended up working with the Palestinian Red Crescent Society with a monthly salary of only $1,000, whereas the average monthly salary of the Lebanese doctor is $3,500, which is the triple of my father's salary. My mother is also a doctor and she received the same salary, but she works with UNRWA. Imagine that, Samir, they have studied for 12 years to ended up with a salary of $1,000 while they have 6 children to feed. So unfortunately, our hard work in this country does not pay off.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, we have so many questions, but I know we're limited on time, so I want to get to Ruba and discuss something that was new to me actually over the past few years. Is Ruba, your family was forcibly displaced in 1967, and so different than obviously 1948 refugees. First, can you talk a little bit, really briefly, about what happened in '67, and then talk to us about some of the differences between the '67 refugees and the '48 refugees, please, and pertaining to how it affects you personally and your family.
Yes, sure. Well, first, my family was displaced twice. The first time it was displaced was due to the Nakba in 1948, as you all know. You know that Palestinians seek refuge to the neighboring Middle Eastern countries, while some of them was displaced to Gaza Strip, and my family was one of those families who were displaced to Gaza Strip. However, 19 years later, the Nakba occurred, which many of you might not know, and it is a 6-day war between Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, in which Israel seized the remaining parts and territories of Palestine, including East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. So hereby, my family was forcibly displaced for the second time to Lebanon. So that's why my family was displaced in 1967 and considered as a refugee in Lebanon. However, if I want to talk about the differences between the 48 refugees, we Palestinians here in this country are all on the same boat because we face similar challenges and similar obstacles. However, there are two major differences between us. The first one, let me say, it's concerning the residence permit. The 48 refugees have permanent residence permit here in Lebanon. However, we, the 67 ones, have temporary ones that have to be renewed every year or every 3 or 6 months. It depends on the situation. And the second difference here is the accessibility to work. As you all know that 48 refugees in Lebanon are restricted to a number of professions, and they are prohibited to work from around 70 profession. So they can work legally, but they are restricted to a number of professions. However, we cannot work legally here unless we issue a work permit. So mainly that's the main difference among us. And of course, these situations induces in the souls of us feelings of inferiority and discrimination.
Thank you for that. I mean, we know that there's so much wrong right now with how the Lebanese government treats you all, and but we know it's not the Lebanese government's fault. We know everything goes back to the Zionist entity. But I want to ask you, what if you inherited Lebanese citizenship? Would you have a better quality of life?
Yeah, of course, we would have a better quality of life, but the question is, can you give up on your own identity, on your nationality that you have inherited from your grandfathers? Is it so easy for you to forget from where you came from? And on the other side, do you think that the Lebanese citizens would accept you among them and forget the fact that you are a foreigner? Well, I never think that any of this might happen. So as long as we are breathing,
Absolutely. Okay, well, you know, I have so many more questions, and you all deserve way more, have much more to say. But we're going to wrap it up right now. On behalf of the North American Nakba Tour, I'd like to say thank you all for listening to us today. We hope you become motivated to take action. And if you were moved in any way or believe that our message is important, we ask that you consider donating to the tour. We are currently raising funds to bring these outstanding young women to North America for an in-person tour next year. You can find information to donate on our Nakba Tour website, nakbatour.com, nakbator.com. Thanks again, and please look for us there for more information regarding these amazing young women. Thank you all for your invitation today.
Thank you, everyone.
Here before the sisters drop offline, I would like to just make a comment and ask them a question, if possible. First of all, we received a comment of solidarity from the Native American water protectors who said they stand in solidarity with Palestine. We recognize genocide when we see it. Shame on Netanyahu. And I would like to add that we, the Palestinian people, stand in solidarity with the struggle of indigenous peoples here against genocide and against erasure by the US government. I would like to ask one question before we move on to the program to Rabab, Haneen, Hiba, and Samar. And that is, they told us many times that you as refugees living in an Arab country should just dissolve, assimilate where you are. And now that you are the third generation refugee, if our return was realized, would you go back to Palestine or would you stay in Lebanon? If I could please start with Ruba, then Haneen, then Hiba, and then Samar.
Yes, sure. Of course, I would go back to my country. It's the country where my roots originated. And there I would have all of my civil and political rights. That's it.
Well, for me, it's an absolute yes, because I think my and our existence is just for the need and the right for return. So we all exist just to say and ask for the right of return. So we would never ask to stay in Lebanon or to be citizens here. We just want to go back and be Palestinians by identity and existence.
Hiba?
Hiba, you're muted. Hiba, are you there? If you are, you're muted.
Maybe we'll go to Samar and then back to Hiba.
Okay, let me answer this question on behalf of all the Palestinian refugees, and the answer is yes. We want to return to Palestine. We want our right to return because we want to exist as Palestinians. We want to live with dignity, and I'm saying live, not just survive in Palestine, in our homeland. And for me, this should not be a question, because what we are fighting for is the right to return. And there's no way that we will give up on this right, or we will stay in Lebanon or in any country across the world.
Thank you, Samar.
Hiba is saying that she lost connection.
Okay, so we lost Hiba. Let me just say that we will have a section of the program for questions and answers. And so if our sisters from Lebanon can stay on the program, we would greatly appreciate that. Connected to the refugees in Lebanon and to our community in Lebanon, I would like to introduce an educational fund, and maybe Charlotte or someone will put up the slide for how to donate to Al-Awda. Al-Awda.org/support is a place to donate, but if you can get the slide up, we would greatly appreciate it. The educational fund that I'd like to introduce is the Maher Yamani Educational Fund. Maher Yamani was a revolutionary Palestinian figure. He was born as a refugee in Lebanon in 1949. He had a long history of struggle against Israel and its proxies, both in Lebanon and abroad. He was a luminary in the liberation movement, and his achievements are too numerous to mention. Maher left us too early when he passed away in February 2019. A group of his friends, of his family members, his friends and comrades convened to honor his memory and preserve his militant legacy through Maher Yamani Educational Fund, a fund that will target needy Palestinian students living in the Palestinian camps or non-registered Palestinian gatherings. Education being a key enabling component that will contribute to the empowering of the youth who will be leading soon the struggle for a free Palestine. Good education is not always available to the needy Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon. The group opted to choose private universities, which are not among the most expensive ones, such as AUB, LAW, or St. Joseph, due to the moderate seed funding that will be used to cover the tuition fees. In the first year, the target is to cover up to 3 students' fees. After carrying out a small survey, it was concluded that the education fund can cover, as a start, a financial aid of $1,500 to $2,000 per year per student. Hoping that the project will be able to grow and raise more funds in the future and thus increase the number of students who will be benefiting from the fund. Accordingly, we can offer financial aid to the students enrolled in some private universities, such as the Lebanese International University, Beirut Arab University, Jenin University, American University of Technology, American University of Science and Technology, and others. They are all accredited. The average annual fees for these universities, except for medicine and engineering degrees, are up to $4,000. For instance, the tuition for a degree in accounting information systems at the Lebanese International University will cost for 3 years, $3,000 per year. Some of these universities give an automatic discount at a minimum of 40%, meaning the cost for students will reach approximately $1,800. The students might obtain a grant from the PLO, which usually covers $400 to $600 per year. The remaining sum will be around $1,500, which would be covered by the Maher Yamani Educational Fund. Another example will be the tuition fees for a degree in communication arts at Jenin University. 3 years, 100 credits, the cost will be $100 per credit. This means that the total fees will be equal $10,000 with a discount of 40% and the PLO grant. Maher Yamani will have to pay about $2,000. So in sum, this fund can pay $1,500 to $2,000 per year per student and put a student through college. The general eligibility requirements are that the student should be a Palestinian refugee enrolled in an eligible degree or certificate program at one of the universities mentioned above. The transcripts should show academic excellence. The fund will try to assist students from one of the 12 refugee camps across Lebanon and in the non-registered Palestinian gatherings across Lebanon, which do not benefit from UNRWA services. The Maher Yamani Educational Fund will strive to select nominees from lowest income families based on equal opportunity, irrespective of their gender, race, geographic, or origin, as long as they are originally Palestinian, or their disability, sexual orientation, and religion, avoiding unfair discrimination. So this is a very important program that aligns with Al-Awda's objectives of providing humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Lebanon and refugees worldwide. Again, please go to alawda.org/support to donate for the Maher Yamani Educational Fund. All donations to Al-Awda are tax deductible. We are a registered nonprofit organization. I'm honored to introduce our next speaker. Born and raised in Nablus, Palestine, Rabab Abdulhadi is a founding director and senior scholar of Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies program. She served as the first director of the Center for Arab American Studies in the University of Michigan, Dearborn. She's widely published as a scholar, activist, and 10-year UN-based journalist with over 80 articles, book chapters, a co-authored book, and several anthologies in 7 languages. She co-founded Palestine Solidarity Committee, Union of Palestinian Women's Associations in North America, and U.S. chapter of the General Union of Palestinian Students. She serves on the board of directors of National Students for Justice in Palestine, advisory board of the U.S. campaign of academic and cultural boycott of Israel, and the executive committee of the California Scholars for Academic Freedom. She has been recognized by several community honors, such as the Alex Saudi Memorial Award, Lucius Walker for Community Organizing, and Courage Awards by Al-Awda and American Muslims for Palestine. She co-chairs Feminists for Justice in for Palestine at the National Women's Studies Association, which named her Bay Area Visionary, and where she co-led NWSA historic vote to affirm Palestine as a feminist issue and support the international call for BDS. More recently, she received the Georgina Smith Award from the 40,000 members of the American Association of University Professors for her commitment to labor and gender and sexual justice, and for the building of the Arab and Muslim ethnicity studies. For over 10 years, Zionist and right-wing Israel lobby groups have sought to get her fired from her job and to dismantle the AMED program in order to delegitimize teaching Palestine and the decolonization of knowledge as legitimate and necessary part of the academic curriculum within and outside California in the United States. These attacks include smear campaigns, one-style Islamophobic and racist ads against her and her students, death threats, a failed but time and energy-consuming federal lawsuit. Zionists have also waged an intensive campaign to cancel her lectures at university campuses, such as Columbia and Syracuse universities. They also pressured the AAUP to rescind the Georgina Smith Award. The Open Classroom and she co-organized in response to the global pandemic were censored by private tech companies, including Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and Eventbrite. Rabab Abdulhadi is involved in a variety of intellectual and public coalition building projects that make links between indigenous and diasporic communities living in the US, third world communities and communities of color, and transnational movements for gender and sexual justice. Brothers and sisters, I just want to add that we consider Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi as a spokesperson for our struggle and a public intellectual all around, not just for the Palestinian struggle, but for struggles for justice worldwide. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rabab. Rabab, you are muted. Your voice is not. Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Because my I had my earbuds and then they went off. Okay, so I'm just gonna try without ear. Okay, so I'm going to try to do the best that I can, because I'm actually at a community protest for the anniversary of Nakba. So I'm sitting in somebody's car, actually trying to do this. Well, so good morning and thank you for having me. I begin by acknowledging that San Francisco State sits on indigenous stolen people's land. And that is something just like Palestine must be acknowledged and resisted. And the indigenous people are resisting it and we support their resistance. Secondly, I want to honor the martyrs and the prisoners and everybody who is day in and day out struggling in Palestine. I don't think we have a lot of time, so I'm going to actually mention a few things about what I see as what's going on today, and to contribute and add to what you have spoken about, Eyad, what the Nakba tour, Samir, and the sisters from Lebanon have spoken about, and what others like Ziad is going to be speaking about. I believe that it was going on today is a question of Israel's goal is complete erasure of Palestine. Now, Israel has failed after 100 years, over 100 years of colonialism, and since 73 years since Israel was founded in 1948, when we call the Nakba, but the Nakba begins before and Nakba continues. And since they have tried to crush multiple Palestinian forms of resistance, whether we talk about inside the 1948 areas where our people were subjected to curfew, martial law from 1948 to 1966, whether we're talking about the rest of Palestine that was occupied in 1967, whether we're talking about the Palestinian refugee community, the displaced Palestinians or Palestinians in Shatat or diaspora. Everywhere there has been an exerted attempt by Israel to silence and erase and crush the Palestinian people. This objective is neither benign nor accidental nor isolated. It is definitely not random. Every single attack, the language, the erasure of the villages, the erasure of the names, changing the language that's going on, the strategies, the discourses that they're trying to promote around the submission, subjugation, and defeat, the ways in which what's going on today, crushing Palestinians, continues from before and today. And what is happening, what you mentioned, Eyad, about what's happening against me and against my students, the AMED Studies program, as well as my colleagues and comrades across many universities, academy within the US and outside of the US, including, and I think we should really first say about what's going on, the attack against Palestinian education, whether we're talking about Palestinian education, as the sisters from Lebanon talked about UNRWA, where we're talking about education for Palestinians in Palestinian universities and schools in the West Bank, the attack and the continued bombing of Gaza, including of academic institutions inside the Palestine 48 areas. There is a Bantu-like education, very similar to the education that the apartheid regime in South Africa imposed, in order not only in order to provide people with less chances of opportunities, but actually more importantly to crush their spirit and evacuate the presence. All of these things are actually part of it. Everything that's going on. The violence itself has to do with the fact that we're dealing with a settler colonial project in Palestine that is inherently racist, that is inherently violent, that is inherently it cannot be modified, it cannot be rehabilitated, it cannot be new and improved. It is a settler colonial project, just like the settler colonial project in the US or the settler colonial project in South Africa or throughout the Americas that has started in 1492, actually. The other issue I think is really important to say that there is no innocence about it. So even the way that we've heard a couple of days ago, the Israeli military spokesperson saying that there's going to be an attack on Gaza, and then he claimed that he was a very sophisticated individual, that he was just mistaken and so on. All of it has to do in order to actually dupe journalists to be able to participate in complicity in furthering the Zionist project. And this is something that reminds us in the US of quote unquote the embedded journalists who have been part of the US invasion of Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere, Grenada, anywhere else, Panama, and so on and so forth. I think what is going on? What are they trying to do? I think what we're seeing today in Gaza, the airstrikes, the bombings, what we're seeing in Sheikh al-Jarrah, where people are actually holding on to their homes and refusing what's going on, what is going on in Lidda. It actually reminds me a lot of many chapters of the oppression of Palestinians, whether we talk about, for example, the summer of 2014, when Israel was carrying out its massacre in Gaza. If you remember, also in Jerusalem, the settlers kidnapped a young Palestinian youth, Muhammad Abu Khtair. It was also Ramadan, and he was sitting outside with his friends. They kidnapped him. They took him to a forest on the land of the destroyed Palestinian village Deir Yassin, made him drink kerosene and set him on fire. And we also know that that was going on in the Nakba areas, in the Palestinian areas, in the 48, in the Palestinian areas that continue day in and day out, land has been confiscated, homes are being destroyed. And one of the things that the US media does, actually, and international, they keep referring to Palestinians in the 48 areas as the Arabs. And when we say Palestinian, it is not but because we don't want to acknowledge the Arabness of the Palestinian. In fact, the leading Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish, wrote one of his very famous poem, Sajjal Ana Arabi, write down I'm an Arab, in order to defy the attempt by Israel, by the Zionist project, to crush Arabic. And by the way, they have already downgraded the Arabic as a as a main language. It's now sort of secondary, but to crush the Arabness of the Palestinians. But now the attempt is to actually consider the Palestinians as quote unquote the minority, the Arabs of Israel, a minority in Israel, in order to actually erase also the indigeneity and the indigenous nature of the Palestinians. The language also, when they are talking about trying to show as if there is symmetry between the Israeli military machine that is pounding Gaza today, of the Israeli police that is going around arresting people throughout the Palestinian areas of 48, through the Israeli border police, the Israeli military forces in the West Bank, the Israeli troops around, and also not to mention also the other weapons that they have with the nuclear weapons and so on. All of this stuff is trying to make it sound as if there is a symmetry between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli the Israeli war machine, and they're trying to actually normalize it, that this is something, it's okay. And this is the whole question, that they're carrying it with impunity, because until the world actually stands up and holds them accountable. I should just mention a couple of things, that we have at least as of this morning, as of yesterday actually, there has 145 Palestinians killed in Gaza, 41 children. I'm sure the numbers have increased since then. 23 women, 1,000 have been injured. 10,000 people, at least as of yesterday, were made homeless. There are 12 communities, complete families in Gaza that have been completely wiped out. They don't exist anymore. And this is according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, Ashraf al-Qudri, in Gaza, which was posted this morning. Why is this going on? What is going on, and why is this happening? It's because there is one is that Israel and Zionism is a colonial project. It's a colonial project that really needs to erase the indigenous people in order to legitimize itself. This is why Israel continues saying we need Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, and Palestinians say no. Palestinians are not going to recognize the subjugation and the taking over of their land. The extent of the attack, the bullying of the attack, signifies and shows us the Israeli arrogance, the arrogance of the Zionist project. But it also, they're trying to emphasize that might makes right, and they're trying to actually completely bully Palestinian subjugation. Now, however, the Palestinian resistance that has been going has shifted the equation. So we now see, and like I think like many of you, we are all following the news. I read the New York Times, which I always like to say that I hate, but I read it because it is the paper that is read by the liberal establishment. I read it and I see that they are actually changing the language. So not only the New York Times, also the various news agents. So for example, the Associated Press today says Netanyahu alleges. They say there is no evidence to back up their claims. They start talking about Palestinians militants. They don't talk. They seized using terrorists in many places. Why is that? Because there is a Palestinian resistance. There is an insistence on going on. But I think that somebody like me, who's a historian, I want to talk about a couple of instances about what are some of his lessons that we have learned, that ways in which Israel is trying to eliminate Palestinian existence. I want to speak about two main issues. One is about the cemeteries. There is an attempt, a systematic design by the Israeli establishment, by the Zionist establishment, to completely wipe out any existence of Palestinians, including the graves in which Palestinians are buried. We saw this in the Manillah cemetery in Jerusalem, which was completely destroyed in order to build in its place, quote unquote, Museum of Tolerance by the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, which is one of the groups that has been targeting us at San Francisco State and targeting other academics in order to kind of silence our narrative. And they erase basically the graves of many Palestinian families in Jerusalem. There is in Ain Hod, in the Palestinian village of Ain Hod, that was not destroyed like the 532 villages that were completely wiped out in 1948. Ain Hod, it becomes a dumping ground, garbage ground for the Zionist community that has established Ain Hod, quote unquote, as a settler, as an artist colony. This is not by the extreme fanatic religious Zionists. This is actually by quote unquote liberal artists who are adopting Zionism. And this is the cemeteries of Haifa, of Jaffa, many of them have been destroyed. So when Israel today says, quote unquote, mixed cities of Palestinians, the reason they become mixed cities is because many Palestinians have been erased and many Palestinians have been taken over in order to take over their land. I want to mention one thing from history, because what's going on in Lidda today, it's actually an elimination of racial violence, a settler colonial project that is going on. And I want to talk about something that actually happened not before Israel was founded. And many of us remember Deir Yassin on April 9th, 1948, that was carried out by the Stern and the Lihi gang, that was led by Ishaq Shamir and Ishaq Shamir and Menachem Begin, who became the prime ministers of Israel, in order to actually clear the way between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem for the Zionist militias to take over Palestine. And the Zionists said that if it weren't for Deir Yassin, Israel would not have been founded on May 15th, 1948, 73 years yesterday. I want to talk about what happened after Israel was founded. Not only the military curfew that was imposed on the community from 1948 to 1966, as I've mentioned. And by the way, Lidda today is under curfew. But I want to talk about the massacre that took place in July 1948, which Ben Gurion, the Zionist leader, actually appointed Egal Alon, who became later a very big leader as well, appointed him as a commander, and appointed Yitzhak Rabin as his deputy, who became the Israeli prime minister, who actually received a peace award for the Oslo Award, the Nobel Peace Prize. Egal Alon ordered the aerial bombing of the city of Lid. This was the first city to be attacked by aerial bombardment from the sky. So what we are seeing in Gaza is actually being repeated, a sort of a continued systematic design by the Zionist military establishment to destroy Palestinians. There was a Salvation Army, Arab Salvation Army that was there. It was ordered by Glob Pasha, who was the British colonial officer, to withdraw. Lit people gathered in Dahmash mosque, inside the mosque, and in front of the mosque there is a church that the Zionists took over as their headquarters. Now this is Israel. Now we're not talking about Zionist militias or Zionist Stern Gang or Lihi Gang. Now we're talking about actually official Israeli military. They took over the church. The people of Lid gathered in the mosque to try to defend. They gathered some old weapons that they ran out of ammunition, and they were asked to surrender. And they were about to surrender, and they were all killed inside the mosque. In addition, what Israel has done is created something called the Delete Plan, which Professor Ilan Pape, the well-known one of the new Israeli historians, titled his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. I just don't like to use the word ethnic, and I don't like to use the word cleansing because it implies as if it's something positive that is going on, which was, but it was completely erasure, a genocide, attempted genocide against the Palestinians. The Delete Plan isolated Lid and Ramle from the east, so people would not go with isolated. So Palestinians from Lid and Ramle would only go to the east, i.e., go to what became later on the West Bank, and in reference to the West Bank. And what they did is that they went in. So I'm trying to find them. Yeah, they went in and they completely destroyed Lid, and it was 250 people were martyred inside the mosque. The numbers of the people in Lidda who were all killed, martyred, fluctuates between 335 people to 426. In Dahmash Mosque, the numbers fluctuate between 80 and 176. And one of the commanders, the commander, the Israeli commander who invaded the city itself by ground troops was Moshe Dayan, who became the Israeli minister of quote-unquote defense during 1967 war. And he was able to do that because there was tank bombardment. So what we're seeing also in Gaza now, and which we saw during the Aqsa Intifada against the Balata refugee camp, against the Jenin refugee camp, of tank and aerial bombardment. We know that during the Aqsa Intifada, for example, they used the Apache helicopters. Then against Gaza, they used F-15. So there is this kind of continuous use of weaponry to kill Palestinians, and they push the Palestinians out. Why do I say that about the Lid in particular? Because I think it's really important to remember that what's going on today in Lid is not something that is just accidental. This is something.
It seems that Dr. Abdulhadi dropped out. We will resume the program as soon as she joins us.
Apologies. This is it's very.
Dr. Abdulhadi is back on. I just want to mention we received a comment that says, "Thank you, Dr. Rabab, for recognizing our native struggle in the Americas. Regardless of what the world knows, many of us, like myself, are refugees in our homelands. Many Americans lavish themselves on the wealth of America, while natives live in abject poverty with no political clout in America's government." Dante Ohotika, Robert Dakota, elder activist, direct descendant of two international treaty signing chiefs, water protector, Wokida Taka, Akui Oyesen. We are all related.
We are indeed all related. Thank you so much, brother. We are all together, and we are struggling with each other, and we are also recognize how the American Indian movement has historically supported Palestine, and Palestinians have supported the American Indian movement, and we stood side by side with people in Standing Rock, with Monakaya, with Idle No More, with the water protectors, with the people who are struggling for rights in the Aloni Nation everywhere around the US. And so this is something that is the struggle that continues. I just wanted to mention a couple of things before my time runs out. Is I think I want to go back to the whole question of the language. In addition, I got interrupted when I was speaking about Linda because I wanted to talk about what's going today. The violence, the racial violence that is not just being conducted by the Israeli military. It is not just being conducted by the police. It is not just being conducted by official organs of the Israeli state. They are also being conducted by mobs that also reminded us, if we want to think about, we are in the United States, so I think we need to think about the history of Charlottesville, of the fact how white supremacists also went again and again and again and marched. When Israel talks about, when the media talks about, quote unquote, the March for Jerusalem Day, when they went and they actually marched and the Zionists march tried to march inside Al-Aqsa, tried to march in the old cities of Jerusalem, inland, in all the Palestinian areas in the 48. This is something that is actually reminds us of the Nazi march in Skokie, Illinois, reminds us of Charlottesville, reminds us of what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C. I think it's really, really important for us to recognize the racial violence, recognize the Zionist Jewish supremacy, the way we recognize white supremacy in the United States. And supremacy does not mean that we are actually indicting all white people or we're indicting all Jewish people. We're talking about an ideology, just like the apartheid South Africa, that actually proposes that one kind of people are superior to other kind of people. And those people who are superior are entitled to take over the land, to quote unquote modernize it. As yesterday, Hayim Sabman, one of the big donors to the Democratic Party, said, "Oh well, Israel is the only democracy of the nation." And the Zionists continue saying again and again, Israel, and Bret Stephens also in the New York Times said so. There is a lot of it's a massacre going on in Palestine today, but the people of Palestine are rising up. And one of the problems also in terms of the naming is that the resistance is referred to as quote unquote conflict or confrontation. And sometimes what is going on with the Zionists is referred to as clashes. And it's not actually, because clashes imply equality and symmetry. There is no symmetry. There is an oppressor and there is an oppressed. There is an occupier and there is an occupied. There is a colonizer, there is a colonized. And I invite people to actually either take some of our classes before San Francisco State completely erases all of them. They've canceled our summer classes. They've canceled our 4 classes last fall. They canceled Palestine-centered courses using the Israeli tactic of creating facts on the ground, using the pandemic as a way to actually create more things to dismantle the program in deference to their Zionist donors and the university being run like a corporation. But I don't want to talk too much about that. What I want to talk about is the ways in which it is really, really important for us to A, recognize the resistance, B, understand that the resistance itself is forcing itself, imposing itself on the context, and forcing, whether you talk about the Zionists, whether you're talking their imperialist allies, or you're talking about the Arab reactionary governments that are allied with them, all of this stuff is being changed. There is nobody no more is touting quote unquote the normalizing deals or quote unquote the Abraham Accords that have been going on, whereby some Arab governments basically sold out. Not Palestinians, sold out to Israel. Nobody is anymore remembering what Trump did. And actually everybody, even though they were touting the Trump quote unquote deal of the century as the best thing that was there, the best game in town, today everybody's saying it wasn't really going to work, which is very interesting, because we would really like people to actually own up and say, we made a mistake. We would like the reporters to say, we made a mistake. We'd like the people in power to say, we made a mistake, but they're not going to do it. Why they're not going to do it? Because there is the oppressors and bullies never stop until they are held accountable. And one of the things that we can do here, where we're at, I'm going to talk about in general, we have to have Israel held accountable to the minimum international standard, to be treated like just any other country, not no more, no less, and be held accountable and uphold the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Boycotting Israel and refusing to normalize the status quo, the oppressive status quo, sanctioning Israel for its behavior, including the International Court of Justice, the human rights, everywhere else, Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, both said that Israel is an apartheid state. Okay, I don't see what people want more, but maybe people need more, and and divestment from companies that do business with Israel, which is something that San Francisco State students actually did. The associated student, the government at San Francisco State actually passed a resolution. This is the whole student government, and surprise, surprise, the university president wrote them a letter back saying, no, I'm not going to uphold it. I'm not going to implement. And this is something we actually see at many university campuses. We're seeing it at University of California, Irvine. We saw it at Pomona. We saw it at University of Toronto. We saw it even by the international leadership of the local 2865, which is the graduate student union of University of California, that voted by over 2/3 majority to divest from Israel. And then the corrupt leadership of the union said to them, oh, well, we're not going to abide by that. But we do know, and so we don't leave it on a negative note, we do know, as you started, Eyad, speaking at the beginning, that we have rising people in the labor movement as well, who are actually joining and recognizing. And the fact that it was ILWU, the Longshore People Union, that actually refused to unload the first ship from South. They were the first ones to refuse to unload the ship from South Africa. They also were the first to refuse to unload the Zim line. So it's actually, there is history. There is history of colonialism. There is history, whether we talk about the French in Algeria, where we're talking about U.S. settler colonialism, where we're talking about apartheid South Africa. There is history of oppression, whether we talk about Vietnam. There is history of oppression, but there is also history of resistance. So we draw lessons from people in the Black Power civil rights movement. We draw lessons from people in South Africa. We draw lessons from our sisters and brothers in Puerto Rico, in the Philippines, in Colombia, in Venezuela, in Cuba, and here in the United States, in the streets of Ferguson and Minneapolis. We draw strength from the people who are the people who are really truly representing their constituencies in Congress, from Cory Bush and AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Andre Carson, and who are actually speaking up, Betty McCollum, who are again and again actually representing their constituencies, not trying to mobilize the constituency in the interest of the lobbies. These are things that are going on. And we also draw strength from the people who struck in 1968, the strikers, the Black Panther Party, the Black Student Union, the Third World Liberation Front, who actually forced San Francisco State to back down and approve the creation of, they wanted third world studies, the creation of the College of Ethnic Studies. With that, they try to decolonize knowledge, and we are trying to do that today. It is also incumbent upon all of us to demand complete cut of U.S. aid to Israel, all U.S. aid to Israel. It is incumbent upon us to stand up day in and day out and hear what people are saying, learn. There is so much stuff to learn. It's incumbent among all of us to come together in a framework around the indivisibility of justice. I am very optimistic. I've never been more optimistic in my life than I am today, but what we're seeing as a possible another intifada, I don't want to call it the third, because there have been many intifadas, by the people rising up, but the people who are rising up need our support, need us to stand with them. We cannot stop when the cameras are turned off. We need to be there day in and day out, so we can minimize the number of losses, the number of sacrifices, and maximize the march of people towards creating a different future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabab. And I do want to emphasize that when we do global mobilization, and particularly mobilizing here in the heart of empire in the US, we need to publicize our marches in order not only to show the Palestinians back home who are rising up that they are among a sea of supporters and a global community that stand in solidarity with them. But we also need to show the Zionists that they are losing this battle. They lost the hearts and minds of people, and now they are losing militarily and demographically this battle. There can no longer be colonization forever in the 21st century. And part of our mobilizing worldwide is to provide the conditions for steadfastness for our people. And that's a good segue in terms of conditions for steadfastness to introduce our next speaker, who works with an organization that provides the conditions for steadfastness by providing water purification systems in Gaza, in the most devastated communities where Gaza was declared uninhabitable by the United Nations. Ziad Abbas is a refugee from the Deheshi refugee camp in Bethlehem. He's a longtime activist and a graduate of the Zionist Dungeons. He's also a founder of the Ibda dance troupe, a children's folkloric group that toured the world. Ziad currently works with Middle East Children's Alliance, where they work on installing clean water purification systems in Gaza. I encourage you all to check out the Maya project on meccaforpeace.org. That's Maya, M-A-I-A, Maya بالعربي, on meccaforpeace.org. Without further ado, please welcome Ziad Abbas.
Thank you, Eyad. Thank you, Rabab, and thank you for all the participants. It's amazing to listening to our sisters from Lebanon. And what a day. I don't know how much time you have, guys. I don't want to go for long. I know I'm going to use a slide. Can you answer me, Eyad?
Yes, you have 20 minutes. So it's 12:35 right now. You can wrap up by 12:50.
Okay, I'll try to make it short. My name is Ziad Abbas. I was born and grew up in the Deheshi refugee camp in Bethlehem. Originally, my family coming from two villages. I will show on the slides soon. But before I start my presentation, and absolutely, it's hard to come to speak after Dr. Rabab and after the other speakers from Lebanon. I'm really humbled to be part of this presentation. For me, it's a history, no doubts. And I want to start from where Rabab ended. There are a lot of things in her talk. It's in my own presentation too. And just want to remind the people, when we think about the future of Palestinian refugees, I want to go back a little bit. Rabab went back actually over 100 years. And for me, one of the major things, and here we can use the slides if it's possible. Yeah, this is one of the photos, actually, one of the slides I want to remind the people. Rabab mentioned actually about over 100 years. Yes, it's over 100 years. And this is one of the first Zionist conference in Basel in Switzerland, 1897, when the Israelis, when the Zionist movement came together, and they decide to start a homeland in Palestine. Actually, there were three proposals in that conference, and they were speaking about Uganda, Argentina, and Palestine. Of course, the plan, it was already formed in that period that they choose Palestine. And just want to remind people, actually, there were 22 women participated in this conference in Basel, and they were not allowed to vote. Women in that period, they were not allowed to vote, and they did not vote, not because they were protesting, because they were not allowed. Anyway, this is something where we, all the time, I think about it, where the Zionist movement and their vision to build a homeland, they didn't plan to come to live with us. The plan, it was to come to replace us. And this is where Rabab, she mentioned actually in her speech, they want to erase us. They want to kick us out of the land. And this is where actually the Ilan Babé, in his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, he spoke about how they planned the ethnic cleansing first. And I will go later with that. Next, you can move with the slides. I will talk with the slides moving. Next, actually, For me, when I say I learned the history mostly from my mom, and I heard the history about what happened in Nakba and what happened in 1948, and before that from my mother. I am coming from a village called Zakaria, but first, I want to go back to the map, actually. I want to remind, this is very important map. This map actually for Palestine in 1878. And in 1878, it show you all Palestine, all these villages. You can find it online, and you can find it in Basia too. And show you how it was Palestine. Here's the black dots. You can see it, the bigger one. It's where they call it the mixed cities, where Palestinian and some Jewish people, they were living in Palestine in that period. Next, I'm coming from a village, it's called Zakaria. Zakaria is not far from Jerusalem. This is the village where my parents, they were uprooted. My mom from other village, Jash, you will see it later. But this is Zakaria, my village. I learned about this village from my parents when they uprooted from the village. My mom, like most of the Palestinian refugees, she closed the door, and my mom, when they start bombing the village, and my mom, she moved with my brother. He was 2 weeks old. Right now, he will, in October, actually, he will be 73 years old. My village, actually, the people left the village between October 16th and October 22nd. My family, they left, and they were waiting in the mountains not far from the village. They were waiting until they will stop bombing the village. And they moved slowly until they reached the Haitian refugee camp. In next slides, I want to show you something. This is why I love to show my slides. I want to show what happened actually a little bit in 1948. These slides, I got these slides when I was in Palestine. I got it from the Israeli archive. Actually, when they opened the archive for the first time, actually, the Israelis, they did the mistake. They opened the archive for the first time. They were celebrating 50 states in Israel, 50 years in Israeli states, and they showed the photos how they were attacking the villages. And I succeed to get some photos. Next, and you can move with it. This is, you can see how they are. This is a village, it's called Bet Natif. You see the Zionist groups, they are relaxing right now after they uproot the village. Most of the people actually, they used to live in this village, living in my refugee camp, the Haitian refugee camp. And you can see how the Zionists relax. Next. Here they are staying in a Palestinian house, and you can see how they are enjoying their time after they uprooted the families. Even playing, enjoying their time. The comments on these pages, in these photos, actually, in the back of the photo, it's celebration after they actually took the village, conquered the village. Next. And when we speak about the ethnic cleansing, Ilan Babe actually spoke about his book, how they had that meeting in the Red House in Herzliya. And they planned the ethnic cleansing. First, to uproot the people. Second, to destroy the houses. And this is when Rabab explained about they want to erase the history. And for 73 years until now, they couldn't erase the history. But it shows you even the plan in that period, how they were doing that. This is he's preparing the bomb. You can see next slide how they were destroying. This is the same village, Bet Natif. Next. This is actually, it reminds me all the time with my mom. My mom, she was, when she left the village, she was with 2 children. Of course, she had the key of the house, like most of the Palestinian refugees, and she's moving out. My mom, she was leaving actually when she left the house without shoes, with 2 children, my father and my grandma. People, they were living in the coast. Actually, they used the sea, and this is when they left from Haifa, from Jaffa, from all the other villages where they went to Lebanon. Most of the Palestinian refugees actually living in Lebanon, most of them coming from the north area, where they used the sea, some of them, to cross back to Beirut and even to Syria. Next. Palestinians, they were arrested. They put them in a prison. And of course, the transfer. Usually when I do my presentation in universities or schools, I stop in this slide. I want the people to think and to look at this slide. This is 1948. And check to these two is Zionist soldiers. If you think about them for a moment, look to their arms. And this is not far from the catastrophe, from the Holocaust. And sometimes it comes to my mind, this is when the victim become a victimizer. They learn how to do, they know how to hurt, and they use this, they copy. Actually, some of the styles used by the Nazi, and you see even they are copying the Nazi. This is actually the Basel Hebrew written going to Gaza Strip, but this is one of the slides like coming from that that period, showing how it's only 4 years, actually 4 or 5 years from the Holocaust, and still they are doing the same. Next. This is the 5 direction where Palestinian refugees they went: Jordan, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and West Bank and Gaza Strip. Most of the Palestinian refugees, the 750,000 Palestinians distributed everywhere. Like my family, we are like shattered everywhere as a family. We never met each other. We are 5 brothers and sisters. We never met each other until 2005. Actually, we met in Jordan for the first time of our time to come together since 1967. I was born in 1964. It was the first time I met my brother and my sister, which they are in the exile. They were living in Lebanon, later in Syria, now in Jordan. Next. This is my refugee camp, the Hesha camp, where I grew up. I know now we have many slides, United Nations rooms. I don't want to go back that deep with the history. I will go faster. But this is all these camps. Actually, this is one of the slides we go back, the Hesha concentration camp in the wall, where the people, they can see. This is the wall, the fence, the Hesha concentration camp, where our youth, actually, they wrote it in the wall. They want to remind the Israeli army with the concentration camp, because our camp was surrounded by fence, 8 meters high, and only one gate to leave the camp to the main street. It started when they built this kind of the fence. It was in 1985, and of course the fence, it was destroyed in December 23rd, 1995, when the Israeli withdrew according to Oslo agreement. They withdrew from Bethlehem. Next. This is part of the fence. Next. This is my camp right now. You can see how the transition between 1948, how the camp has changed, and the people, they are still living there. And Eyad spoke about the water. Look to the roofs of the houses. All the houses, they have water tanks. And sometimes these tanks actually attacked by the Israelis. Water issue, it's a huge problem for Palestinians everywhere. And right now in Gaza Strip. Next. And you see here, it's a testimony by some of the Israeli soldiers, actually, how they target the water tanks for the people. Next. Okay, we can go with the slides. I don't mind, and I will tell you when to stop. This is some photos. Actually, this is long time, 2003, Al-Aqsa Intifada. She spoke about it. And here, I am working in Mecca, Middle East Churches Alliance. And our focus to support our children in Palestine, in Lebanon, everywhere. We can do that for especially refugees. And our children is a big target for the Israelis. And until now, actually, Israel, the only country in the world, between 500 to 700 children every year in the military court. This is one of the things when we speak about how they target the Palestinian children. Next. And here we are going back to Gaza. 2.2 million people right now, they are living in Gaza Strip. And you can see 43% of them, they are below 15 years old. This is why Israel, when they target Gaza, wherever they will shoot, they will impact actually children. And now to speak about this for me as a Palestinian refugee, I grew up in a refugee camp, and for us, it was like our childhood without, I call it like our childhood without childhood. Actually, we grew up in a refugee camp. Like right now, many Palestinian refugees, many Syrian refugees, many Yemeni refugees, many people like in the Arab world right now going to in the same experience. Children, they are without childhood when they grow up in a refugee camp. And not only this, they are a target. And if you see 43% they are living in Gaza under 15 years old. This is the high number. Wherever they are bombing, they will impact that. And the number actually, it's increasing. Right now they are speaking about 47 children, and this number still, the statistics is coming. And the sad part, when we start speaking about the people they are killed, they are numbers. The people, just to go back with their memory, 1 week ago, these children, they were playing in the street. Actually, they were waiting for the feast, the Eid. And right now they are disappeared. They are not there anymore. And this is the irony in the Palestinian history, where we become numbers. And even I talk with the people, I talk with journalists, etc., in Palestine and Gaza, etc., where they speak about numbers. But in fact, these are children, human beings. They are not exist anymore. Next. Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip, it's very tiny. It's like 139 square miles. It's very tiny, actually. And only there in Gaza, they have 6 gates. 5 gates actually controlled by the Israelis, and 1 gate controlled by the Egyptian. And this is why we say sometimes Gaza, it's the biggest open prison on earth right now, because the 2.2 million people living in Gaza. And this is keep it like for almost now 15 years for the siege imposed in Gaza. And it's not surprising. I like what the Israel is doing for Gaza. I know I have only a few minutes to finish, 2-3 minutes. For me, I was thinking like with my slide sharing, and these are the bombs actually, the military equipments used by the Israelis, and all of these stuff came from United States actually. They used it in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and now they are using that against the people in Gaza. In the closing, you can go with my slides, of course. I'm going to talk closing comments. For me, I said in the beginning, the Zionists, they came to replace us. And now after 73 years of the Israeli state, it reminds me when Israel celebrated actually 50 years in the past, where Israel, they were dreaming, and the Zionist movement, in that period, they were dreaming and they were planning that, you can stay in this slides, please. The Zionists, they were planning that after 50 years, Israel will produce the new Israeli to the world. A new Israeli will speak Hebrew, they will have their own culture, even they are coming from different backgrounds, and they are coming to live inside Israel. They will be able to produce, they will be maybe with the blue eyes, blonde, because most of the Western Jews, they are controlling the state, and until now they are doing that. And of course, after 50 years, I'm speaking 23 years ago, many Israelis intellectuals, they came back and they said we failed, because the new generation of Israelis, they are coming together, and this is actually make the Israel all the time shaking. Right now, I can say what's going on right now and connected to the Nakba, which the Nakba never stopped, it continued, and the Palestinian struggle never stopped. This is remind me actually when I was at a refugee camp, I used to stand in the front of the restaurant or the food distribution center of United Nations, and my shoulders down, feel like defeated, devastated, because to get the food. Right now, look, we are, as Palestinian, all of us everywhere, we are very proud who we are, because our struggle and our resistance in the ground everywhere. And I asked to stop in these slides. There is something in our imagination as Palestinian living right now in Palestine, all over the world. And one of the first speakers, she spoke about 2011, when the people, they were marching to the borders from Lebanon, from Jordan, from Syria, and coming. And this is actually one of the slides coming from in Golan Heights when they cross. Sometimes I look at this, and this is like rehearsal or exercise to access our right of retain. In my imagination all the time, I can imagine that, and we are very close with this, what's going on right now. I can see the people coming back to their houses. Every Palestinian right now in the ground in Palestine is become a threat, no matter where you live, where you are. The moment you introduce yourself as a Palestinian, you make every Israeli, every Zionist uncomfortable. They are aware that they stole our land, they took our land. And both sides, I can say, us, Palestinian, and them, they are seeing the same end. It's coming close. If not this time, it's accumulation process. Next time, I hope this time, Rabab spoke about this intifada, maybe it will be intifada or bigger than intifada, who knows? People in the ground, they decide that. But I can see right of return, the practicality of right of return, it's coming. I can see these slides like the people coming back, it's coming. And every Israeli, as I said, they realize and they are aware that we are coming back. Their job as Zionists to make it difficult for us. Our job as Palestinian refugees to make it faster as much as we can. And what's going on in the ground right now is a big push toward this. This is an amazing moment where you see every Palestinian everywhere in this world, they are coming together. And our young leadership, there are many steps ahead of our leadership, political leadership. They are clearing our direction. And this is something amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ziad, very much for this presentation. We will open it up for the audience to take any questions. Before we do that, and as the questions come in, I would like to ask the speakers if they could comment a little bit on one concept, and that is the resistance forces in Palestine, including those who are rising up in 1948 towns, are saying that this is not just another intifada. They are raising the slogan that this is the war for liberation. And what this conjures in my mind are scenes from the Battle of Algiers. I wonder what your thoughts are about that, and if you can comment a little bit on how that would intersect with the right of return.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking all the speakers. It seems like Rabab dropped out, but if Ziad and Salim can comment on this, that would be great.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I remember the first intifada, second intifada. It's okay to go? I was like in the first intifada in 1987 and 88, all this period, the second intifada and in Palestine. And I know we still have a lot of issues in Palestine we need to deal with, but what's going on right now, it's helping us to clarify where we are going. No doubts that we need a new leadership as Palestinian people, especially after Oslo agreement. And as I ended, I remember the first intifada when the unified leadership of the first intifada was underground and leading the people. It was one leaflet organizing the whole Palestinian community in West Bank and Gaza Strip. And you see the strike, the general strike, how shops closed at 12 o'clock. Even the second intifada was different a little bit. And this is coming together. Now we watch the Palestinians, they are using all the forms of struggle. To be honest with you, I don't know how to rely and to see it, but people in the ground, they have the key of that, because you have Gaza, they have their own way of the struggle. This is the first time the Palestinian, they are raising their challenging in very strong way the Israelis, and me something like even shaking me that yesterday when I heard that about that they lift the curfew from Tel Aviv. I don't know how many people they saw that. when they announced Gaza, they will give Tel Aviv 2 hours. It reminds me when we were in the Hesha refugee camp, and they used to impose curfew for weeks sometime, and they announced on the loudspeaker, you have 3 hours to go out to get your food. This is a new era. This is a new stage where you see the Palestinian doing this. This is one thing. The second thing, what the people they are doing. We saw East Jerusalem. We saw Sheikh Jarrah. We saw the people there. When you see the Christian people in Jerusalem going to pray in Al-Aqsa, how our community come together. And this reminds me with the first Intifada a lot, where we were in the mosque Friday and Saturday, we were in the churches in Bethlehem. And this is bringing the community together. The third thing is 1948. And 1948, it's something huge right now. This is when I said that Israel look at every Palestinian now as a threat. It doesn't matter where you live. And it can carry for anything. They make it like I spoke about, we were dreaming about right of return. Now you can see the practicality and you can imagine it. What's going on on the ground, something is actually, for the Palestinian, it's not a surprise. You can see that, you can feel it, because the oppression is there all the time. For the Palestinian living, especially in Palestine, they live this moment. They live injustice every minute. For the people like underground or the groups, they are in solidarity with us. It's maybe they cannot see that, but for us, we know eventually there's something coming. Eventually. Everything is happening eventually. Right now, we are coming together. 1948, they are coming out in very, very, very strong way. Shock the Israelis. When you hear some Israeli officers speaking about that Israel fighting in many fronts at the same time, it seems they were not prepared that much for this. It was shocking them. And because 1948, because Rabab spoke a lot about Red, Haifa, Akka, all these cities, because our community, our people in the ground in 1948, can take to different level. How it will go, I don't know. How much it will be strong, I don't know. But I know if it will not this time, maybe next time. It's part of accumulation process. This time it's huge. It will impact every Palestinian. And imagine, I am saying this to everyone listening to us and watching. Imagine a child born in Gaza in 2006, in the beginning, 2006, 2007, in the siege. Right now, they are 14 years. All their childhood, it's under the siege. And this is creating the culture. This is the culture of our resistance, like we have a resistance of our culture. And this is the environment where they grew up. And how I'm living in the United States, I'm privileged here in the United States comparing with the people there. But still in our dreams, you see the Israeli occupation. You still dream about it, about them, about the Israeli soldiers, etc. I believe this time, if the leadership stay in the ground, they lead what's going on, and we will not have Oslo leadership to try to cultivate. Around this, there is a potential for everything is open. Who knows what will happen? And I'm worried all the time. I'm worried about, like, you can see all the Arab regimes that try to have a ceasefire, I know they say we want to stop the victims, but there is something stronger than this. They don't care that much about the Palestinian victim. They are worried about themselves. They are worried about themselves that this is when it will impact. It will create a culture in the Arab world too. Look what's going on in Jordan. People, they are marching to the borders in Lebanon. And this is something can grow up. Who knows? It depends on the people on the ground. And I hope there is a leadership will come and they lead this everywhere. I believe there are in every area, there are leadership. This is how it's organized. But how it will go, I can't answer it 100%.
Samir, if you can comment on the impact of the unified uprising throughout Palestine, and particularly the impact on Duwal al-Jawar, the surrounding countries around Palestine, and how people in the refugee camps are taking in this news and what they are doing with it. Samir, are you there? Okay. Well, I would like to thank all who attended today's program. We will post this program and circulate it both on YouTube and Facebook. We are indebted with your participation. I know everybody is very busy organizing right now. What I would like to add is that as we see the transformation of Israel as a Zionist project for a Zionist dream, a colony built on Palestine for Jews, to the clear expression of it becoming simply a US aircraft carrier, with the Americans doubling down behind it in order to maintain their power in a waning empire. The US imperialism right now is on the retreat. And the way that we see the Israelis responding to that is that they're also doubling down. It seems like that the Zionist program is in trouble, and that the Palestinians have rejected Oslo with their feet. They no longer pay any attention to what comes out of the Muqata in Ramallah. Elections, no elections, it doesn't matter anymore. This is a colonial program that needs to be dismantled. That's the slogan that our people are raising, and it falls on our shoulder, people who live in exile, and particularly in the heart of US empire, to take action. Our first action is coming up next week, and that is to blockade the Zimliner. We want to ensure that there is no place for that port, for that boat to dock. So if you live anywhere on the West Coast, please go to aroc.org, AROC.org, and look for Block the Boat action and ensure that you will show up. There is a text program that we have to call on people to show up to the different ports and picket, block the boat, picket the Zimliner, and work with the ILWU close by to ensure that they will not unload or load any shipment going to the apartheid state of Israel. This is really important. This is how apartheid in South Africa was hastened by the suffocation of their economy, and we need to do our part in laying siege to the Zion Nazi state called the State of Israel, the American aircraft carrier that exists on our land. Thank you all for your participation, and we wish you a happy Eid al-Fitr. And we also ask you to participate in the boycott of Biden's Eid for Palestine. If you please record this link. This is really important because Biden is holding an online Eid celebration in order to whitewash the Muslim community here in normalization. We know that Biden himself has declared himself to be a Zionist, and he views Israel as a strategic leverage point for the assertion of American empire. So boycott Biden's Eid. Eid Mubarak for everyone else. Thank you for your participation, and let's make sure that we strengthen all the Israelis around the country. Have a good day, everyone.